Hey guys, so we're going to talk about rendering hair. I'm also going to briefly review technical flats. So what I've started with right now is I've just got 3 faces. One I have in a full-length figure just so we can talk a little bit more about rendering and just the approach. Again, I'm sure a lot of you have tried different methods and what works for you works. Just be sure that the ultimate goal is having a finished looking figure. Yeah, we talked about like technical perspective, so you have to keep in mind that, this is intended to feel 3-dimensional. So right off the bat, I've got like a pixie with a side part. I've got long, wavy hair that has a long fringe or long bang, and then we're gonna have a curly haired face here as well. And here is your flats croaky. So you already have a handout of this, and what's most important is that whatever design you illustrate on the figure also needs front and back of your flat, okay? So for the flat, we do those on tracing paper, then we trace them onto marker paper, and we use different weights of the micron pens. For outline, we use the thickest, that's usually like an 08 or an 05. Then for seam lines, we use an 03, and then for top stitching or any seaming, we use an 01, okay? So just be sure you're working in that size order. Let's start with dark hair. We can do black or dark brown. Let's do dark brown just because we can add a little bit extra dimension there. So I always like to start with kind of gesturing that the hair feels like it's individual strands and it's coming from the crown. So typically we'd say the crown when we mean like the top of the head or just like the place that the hair is growing from. It doesn't hurt to leave some white. That's gonna add as reflection from a light source. And you can always go back in and clean that up with color pencil later on. So after I've laid out my base color, technically speaking, we would do the skin tone first. And a lot of my markers are at school, so you'll have to bear with me. But mostly for the skin tone, we're just gonna lay out the marker as evenly and quickly as possible, so that we can get a nice saturated, even tone for the skin, basically like a base layer. If there's any areas that you need to work in a little bit heavier, just try to work when the marker is first being laid down. This is a Prismacolor marker, so they're a little easier to work with. They don't bleed as much as the chart pack. And notice that there's certain areas that I'm gonna emphasize the shading on, so like the jawline and in the neck as well, so you can kind of gesture in either direction. Same for the skin in areas that might be exposed from your swimsuit or the garment. And I just like to work quickly. Can always clean things up later that might end up, looking a little uneven. Even if you get outside the lines, you can always go back in later and just clean things up. All right, so this was supposed to be based on hair, but it doesn't hurt to kind of see how 2 different markers work with each other. So we've got the Prismacolor for the skin tone, and we've got the chart pack in for the hair. We'd assume that the legs would be filled in as well, but again, I just want to focus on hair for the most part. And just kind of darkening some areas that meet closer to the garment here. Doesn't hurt to kind of give yourself an implied border, even with like the arms. And we talked about cylindrical perspective and how those areas might start to lose light. So don't hesitate to make them darker as it gets to like the border of the person. So again, you lay out your skin tone, then you can lay out your hair. I'll do blonde for the next. So I've got this goldenrod in my Prismacolor, and you're gonna notice that can get a little bit more texture. Just because the tip of this marker, the chisel tip, is a little bit harder and doesn't doesn't blot as much ink as the chart pack. And then I can just go in and swoop some heavier bits there. I know I kind of removed a lot of the white here, but that's okay. We can bring that back in with even like a white color pencil. And lastly, let's talk about the curly hair. So for curly, we want to have, I like to place a border or like some sort of emphasis of like where the hair is gonna follow a shape. So here I've just kind of given her a rounded outline, and I'm just gonna make like little C shapes and follow that. And I'm gonna use the same sort of technique. You can see I've already done her bangs a bit. I'm gonna use the same technique when I go in with the marker. So let's do, I don't really wanna do like artificial colors, but I don't think it will hurt to have one that feels a little bit more like stylized, if you will. So I've got this peach chart pack, and I'm just gonna do the same thing I did with the outlining and just kind of gesture the curly bits. Because remember, this hair is ultimately tons of different strands, well, thousands of different individual strands. So we want to be sure that you get texture and movement, and it should feel almost like it's unfinished when you start, and then we're gonna go in and add more texture. So I'm gonna let that dry for a second, because then I can always build up more depth with the color when I get to it. But back to, okay, we're okay. So I'm gonna start light to dark with this. It's obviously darker hair, so I can use like darker brown pencils to just kind of like refine areas. And it helps because it creates like a stop and starting point for where the markers are already laid out. So just kind of pulling out those hairs, getting kind of wispy with it, making sure that it feels darker at the crown, at the top, and at the ends there, and just kind of reinforcing to make it feel more finished. So hair doesn't have to be overworked. You can always go in with like a black color pencil and outline that as well. And you can also go in with the white color pencil and just kind of add back in some extra bits of reflection coming from a light source. So we assume there's like a light source over top of her. And then last but not least, you would trace out your figure in the brown color pencil. And then with a black, you can do her eyes. And then you can decide on, you know, however you want to do the eyebrows. Different ways of styling them can make them feel like a different personality. And then you can do a lip in like a pop color, depending on what type of styling you're going for. And we've talked about this before, how nostrils are like, you know, in any kind of texture, or the face doesn't have to be overworked. But yeah, if you want to get a little bit more personality in there. Same with the blonde. I'm working with limited pencils because a lot of my stuff is at school, so bear with me. But I'm just gonna work in a little bit darker tone of brown here. Again, kind of working off the crown at the top, and then just following and creating gesture and movement. As we get closer to the figure, you know, the hair is going to become darker or shaded. And then you can just kind of pull out away from those areas. And then work in some different colors here and there just to create more dimension. And this would be a good time to even go back to the marker, use the little baby end to give yourself some shading. And last but not least, you can go in with the black and kind of outline the perimeter. Again, doesn't have to be overworked. It just kind of creates this border or more of like a finished effect. But what's very important is just creating all of that kind of depth of feel where it feels like it's kind of popping off of the page. And then for our last hair, you'll want to find, we can go back into the marker and make a little bit more dimension where it counts. And of course, there goes the sun. I like to kind of dot it closer to the face and along the exterior as well, the perimeter edge, just to make it feel like it's popping a bit. You can use different tones of markers. You can even go in with like the gray in areas that might have a little bit more shading. Okay, that was not the best choice. Trial and error. But same idea. So I'll work with some kind of brown. Just to start feathering out, covering that original pencil. Oof, okay. That got really bright, but we kind of needed it. But just working in different tones, or more like working tonal with what you've started with, and making sure you have plenty of texture there. But yeah, that's hair. Let's talk about flats. So we've got our one piece here. It's a halter. There's a crisscross. I've added a dart just to make it feel a little bit more finalized. So I'm gonna grab some tracing paper. And you can make this figure larger if you like, but keep in mind that when you're doing it on presentation boards, it can get a little crowded. So first things first, you've got two forms on the page, which is great because they're both the same. One has an arm gesture, so if you had like long sleeves or some sort of detail that you want to show, that was going to be turned in from the other side of the arm, you could use that one. But what's really important here is proportion, okay? So think of, you know, how far down is this cutout for the halter. I like to give myself like a center. It'll make more sense later. Since this garment is symmetrical, I really only have to draw the one side of it. And you can get a little bit more stylized with them if you want to make the form, the flats figure look a little bit less flat. You see I've kind of curved in the hip there and then placing in. Okay, so now I've got my front view in tracing, and I can just fold this in half so that I can have a symmetrical illustration to the opposite side. And then I'll just trace this all through. You'll be a lot more patient than I am right now because I just want to be sure we can fit this in and not take too long with this lesson. Again, it's mostly just for reference. But something to keep in mind is that this flat figure is not on a body. We don't see the croquis with this. So that means that anything that goes to back view, like the back of this neckline, we're gonna see from the front. Something else to keep in mind is that if there is any top stitching, we have to complete that. So on the figure, I would probably put top stitching or finished stitching edge along the neck, along the leg opening there, maybe on the inside of this strap as well. And you can always do it like around the cutout, but it's swimwear, so you don't need to worry about too much of that. But that is my front view. So for my back view, I'm gonna have to trace that as well. And with the back view, because this is a halter, I'm gonna assume that the back is obviously lower because we've got this necktie. And something also that's important is that because we have the necktie from front to back, we're only gonna see, so imagine there's a neck in here, right? We're only gonna see the back strap. We're not gonna see the front straps anymore. But those will peek out from the back view. This cutout might peek out from the back view as well, but maybe the back neckline dips lower. So let's assume that there's a stitch on the inside that we don't see from the front. That would just be like a finishing detail. And then maybe there's like a center back seam from back. Since this is fairly low cut on the leg opening, I'm gonna leave the back and the front the same. But let's say like this was a thong, for example, maybe it would cut out higher like this, and these areas would be shaded in gray. So anything that we see that becomes the inside of the garment is gonna be colored in gray once it is brought onto marker paper. So I'm only filling this in here for reference. But when we bring these to marker paper, that ends up being your full length figure rendered, right? Imagine it's all in the color. It has all the finishing details. And then we have our front and our back view flats. So for all your figures, you must have a full length figure, front and back view flats. Any interior areas will be shaded in gray. Last but not least, for the flats, you would bring those to the marker paper. Oof, this eraser is not that good. You would bring your flats, nope, just kidding, to marker paper, and those would be traced in micron pen. So I apologize, I don't have my micron pens with me here today at my house. They're all at school, but let's assume that this is an 05. So I'm gonna trace through with nice, long, continuous strokes. I'm just doing perimeter edge right now. All right, so when I'm doing anything on the interior, I'd have to use an 03. So outline 08 or 05. Any seams are going to be in an 03, and top stitching in 01, okay? You may have a set of markers that has different size increments, but what's also really important is them being very, very clean. So I'm obviously rushing this because I don't want it to be too long of a video. But any top stitching, so we mentioned in the original, I've got a hidden top stitch that's in this neckline here too. And anything that is interior view where we can see the inside of the garment, that is going to be shaded in gray. So that will be shaded in gray to imply that it's the inside. And then for our back view, same idea. We trace through our back view. Same rules apply with the weight of the micron. And I want to show you this one quickly so it's understood what areas of the garment we're seeing and where. So this is an asymmetrical halter neckline, and that's why you're seeing almost like the reverse of this crisscross here. But now we see the interior of the bodice, or interior of that area of the garment. And again, any top stitching that's on the flats must be visible on your swimsuit. If there's anything on the inside, which is very typical to have stitching inside, that needs to be emphasized. I may even have it on the inside of this cutout. And you're gonna do a much more clean finished version of that. Seaming is important. Most swimsuits do have a center back seam. And then last but not least is to shade the interior of your flats. And I'm just using a gray number 3 here. I wouldn't go much darker than that. And voila, so you've got full length design sketch with front and back view flats and demonstration for hair.